Well, hello again and welcome to another video on my channel. I do like to mix my channel up, as you're probably aware. I don't like to keep doing the same old things. So this is a little bit different again, this video. It's got a little bit of a historic theme. I love history, as you're probably aware from, I collect old radios and televisions, and I like the theatre organ history. But this is a bit more boating related history this time. A few weeks ago a friend phoned me, and he was clearing an old boat shed out, and he knew I liked things and had things hanging up in my workshop, and I've got one or two quite elderly life jackets in there already, and he kindly gave me this. He found this old cotton Kapok Ministry of Transport standard life jacket in this old barn. He was going to throw it in a skip, but he thought, no, I'll hang on to it, and he kindly gave it to me. The joke was that on the proviso that I had to try it out and to see if it still worked. Well, maybe more on that later, he says. But I thought it'd be interesting. This one is dated. It's got its Ministry of Transport date tag and a stamp, rather, in indelible ink, and it's 1950 in Hull. Obviously they all had to have a ministry tag and certified that they were to the standard, and it got me wondering sort of when did this kind of life jacket come in? How long was it in service? I know this kind of life jacket was still widely on ships in the 1960s even, so I thought I'd do some research, or try to do some research, and I came across a very interesting story, not necessarily about this jacket, but about the earlier type of this type of jacket and how it all came about. So I'd like to sort of tell you about that story, my findings, and because I thought it was very interesting anyway. So here we go anyway. Now, it's perhaps very ironic that a woman born at St Helier in Jersey in the Channel Isles, that was named after a shipwreck in New Zealand, bear with me, should be spurred on by the loss of her elder brother, sadly, at sea, and then the loss of the Titanic, Mid-Atlantic, to go on to well, I don't know whether invent is the right word, but to develop a better life jacket. Well, that's exactly what happens in this story I'm going to tell you, which is true, and it's all based on fact. Orpheus Newman, strange name, but more on that in a minute. Orpheus Newman was born in St Helier in September 1863, get the dates right and the months. She was the youngest of 6 children born to Mary and William Newman. Her father was a seaman. She was named after HMS Orpheus, the naval ship. Now, why this was, because her eldest brother, Henry, was serving on this HMS Orpheus at this time, and according to a family legend, and I think there's some truth in it as well, by all accounts, Mary, her mother, had a very vivid premonition, dream, that HMS Orpheus was going to sink, or had sunk, in New Zealand, or been shipwrecked. Well, nothing happened for a few months. Obviously, news in those days took a long while, to get back to people. But a few months later, after her premonition, sure enough, news broke on the Channel Isles that HMS Orpheus had actually been shipwrecked, I believe just off Manukau in New Zealand, and this was on the 7th of February 1863. Now, naturally, Mary Newman thought her eldest son Henry had tragically perished and lost his life in the shipwreck. I thought at this point in time it'd be good to have a look at a couple of pictures of HMS Orpheus as it features name-wise so much in this little historical video. And here we can see it. It was commissioned in 1860 in Chatham in Kent. It was still a fully rigged ship, but it also had a horizontal single expansion steam engine, this being the 1860s. I think it was some 225 feet long, which is 69 metres, and some 40 foot in beam, which is 12 metres. Like I've said before, it had a crew of 259, and here sadly we can see an actual oil painting of the ship being wrecked off Manukau Harbour in the 7th of February 1863. On doing a little bit of research, I think many of the seamen on the ship were very young, aged between sort of 12 and 18, just learning the trade of being a seaman. So as I say, many young men obviously perished in this shipwreck, which I believe is still one of New Zealand's worst shipping disasters ever to this day even. And so obviously she was still very much grieving when her daughter was born in the September of 1863, and as a tribute she thought it'd be rather fitting to name the newborn girl Orpheus, after HMS Orpheus, the ship where she thought her son had been serving and was, shipwrecked and had obviously been lost at sea. So hence why the girl has a rather strange name, Orpheus, but makes sense in some respects. It seems the girl, Orpheus, had a very troubled childhood mind. As a young girl growing up, and it's reported that she suffered from some sort of almost dry drowning fits as a child, which obviously brought a lot of troubled talk and hushed talk amongst the very superstitious fishing community of St Helier in Jersey at that time. Obviously a lot of people that go to sea still today on boats, fishermen in particular, are very superstitious people, and this whole thing that this child was getting these sort of dry drowning fits was thought very odd at that time. And in fact, at 8 years old, her parents took Orpheus to a hypnotist in Paris to try to cure her of these sort of drowning fits. And way back then, I think in Victorian times, there was a belief that women could pass sort of emotions and a lot of other things on it to a child before it was born even. And Mary Newman, the mother, thought she'd done this with Orpheus, I think. So as I was saying, I think Mary Newman probably thought that she'd imprinted her thoughts and emotions onto the soul of the unborn child, and her mother believed, this was through her grieving for her eldest son, Henry, who'd been lost, or she thought had been lost, on HMS Orpheus. However, the Paris hypnotist told her parents that Orpheus's will was stronger than his, and he could not cure her of the fits. So unfortunately, as I think she had a very troubled childhood, and then sadly her father William died in 1871, and then quite amazingly in 1873 her mother Mary decided to take the 3 young children, William, Anne and Orpheus, and emigrate from St Helier in Jersey to New Zealand. As by this time, remarkably, they had found out that her eldest son Henry did not in fact lose his life on the shipwreck of HMS Orpheus. He was one of the lucky, I believe it was 69, who made it ashore, and he had been discharged from naval service and had actually settled in New Zealand. But it seems amazing to me that in these Victorian times so many families set off on these horrendously long sea passages to countries that they didn't really know. They'd probably not seen many pictures or heard a lot of stories about New Zealand or what it was like or what life there entailed, and yet they just went off, thinking that there was a better life there waiting for them. I think that's quite amazing, and the length of time that these passages often took. And strangely enough, en route on the long sea passage, they encountered a storm of some greatness by all accounts, and this seemed to cure Orpheus of her drowning fits amazingly, and I don't think she ever had another one of those after encountering this huge storm actually at sea, which there again is quite amazing. And then later on, when they were well settled in New Zealand, sadly more tragedy hit the family when her brother William, who became a fisherman in New Zealand, he sadly was lost at sea and presumed drowned, and so there was more tragedy for the family, with the sea. And anyway, by this time Orpheus had married, and strangely enough she married a seafarer. Her husband was a chap called Norman Beaumont, and he became a ship's master trading between the South Islands, the Pacific Islands, and I think all round Australia and New Zealand. And obviously the young married Orpheus would accompany him on some of these journeys around the South Isles and the Pacific Isles and what have you. And around this time as well, we're up to sort of 1912 now, I think news broke of the tragic sinking of the Titanic mid-Atlantic, and there again that really troubled Orpheus, to think that so many people had lost their lives again from a ship. And also at that time the Great Britain Board of Trade called for better life-saving aids on all ships, and in fact the Board of Trade issued a competition to invent a better life jacket that would be carried on all ships and would meet a standard set by them, and there'd be one on every ship for every passenger and crew. As it seems up to this point, there were certain standards, but they weren't necessarily always adhered to by all accounts.
Well, here we have a couple of pictures of Orpheus Newman, or Orpheus Beaumont as she was now, because she was married. This is around the time, I would think, of the Titanic sinking, and when she started her quest in the design of a new life jacket.
And even if we move on a few years still to 1915, when a German U-boat sunk the ship the Lusitania in the First World War, it was noted in one of the inquiries that followed, there was 3 types of life jacket on the Lusitania, and there was nothing standard. There was no standard, and say to have one ship with 3 different types of life jacket seems almost bizarre, really. And Orpheus got really involved in this, and she set her mind to this, which must have been quite something for a woman of that sort of Edwardian period. Obviously it was a very male-dominated time, and she set her mind to trying to develop a better life jacket, basically. I would think, as she'd travelled the South Seas, she would have been quite familiar with the white, fluffy, almost cotton woolly type material called Kapok that is harvested from the seed pod of the Kapok tree, because it grows in the South Islands apparently. I mean, this Kapok is remarkable stuff, really. It's moisture resistant to a point, it's very quick drying, it's very resilient, and the amazing fact about Kapok is it can support up to 30 times its own weight in water, so which is amazing fact, really. There had been Kapok tried in life jackets up to that point, so she was not sort of inventing nothing new by any means. But if we take a look, say, go back to the Titanic, the life jackets on the Titanic, what they were all cork. Cork is a wonderful, floating material, and it was cork in like a cotton vest. But what they were finding, these ships were getting so tall, high, many sort of decks tall, and people jumping, if you had to jump, say, like particularly off, for instance, off the Lusitania, which sank in 18 minutes, you put the life jacket on, you jumped, the cork would often ride up, and it's so hard it could end up doing quite serious damage to the neck, face. In fact, I've even heard that the force as your body hit the water and the jacket rode up, it could even break the neck. Apparently, the cork is so hard. If you think, and so that's there again. Kapok has the huge advantage. Anyway, Orpheus pursued developing this life jacket, and it obviously took her many years because. There's a well documented, well, not particularly well documented, but there is some documentation of her having much correspondence with the Board of Trade representatives in Australia. And I presume she was sending her ideas or her prototype life jackets to them, and they would then test them, try them out, evaluate them, and there was much correspondence between, the Board of Trade in Australia and Orpheus in developing her life jacket. And there's reports of the Board of Trade sending, problems back to her, but as many problems as they sent back, Orpheus found very good solutions to these problems, it would seem, and eventually in, I think it was January 1918, and it was reported on the 21st of the 1st 1918 in one of the New Zealand daily papers that an Orpheus Newman had succeeded in creating this new, they called it a buoyancy aid, which is probably a very good name for it, and that this had now been adopted by the Admiralty, the British Admiralty that is, and the British Board of Trade. And so obviously I think the Naval Admiralty put an order in for 30,000 of her life jackets straight away. It was very similar to this, I have to say, and if we just have a look at this, it just, her life jacket was much the same. It had two, if you like, pouches of, that was the front, that was the front, and that was the back. It went over the head. Hers had a little bolero piece here, that was the only difference, under the arms, and it had a couple of draw cords here at the front that pulled together. But it was very similar to that, very incredibly, similar. And I think one of the advantages why it was so liked by the Board of Trade was, in the end, because it was so easy to put on. You could put it on inside out, upside down. You didn't even have to tie it up. You got it over your head. It was under your arms. It would offer buoyancy. It wouldn't come off. It could be put on very quickly in a panic situation. if a ship was sinking, say, like the Lusitania, in minutes, as often ships or boats do, it could be got on really quickly. And I think that was the plus point that really sold it to the British Board of Trade and the British Admiralty. And I'm told, you know, towards those latter few months of the First World War, her life jacket became, you know, the only one that was used on all the British naval ships of that time. Her life jacket became on all the UK ferries of that time. Most of the merchant ships, she called it a Salvus Life jacket, which, there again, I didn't realise this, but Salvus is Latin for safe, which seems very, you know, very good and quite a good name. And but there'll be some pictures interspaced in this video. And
here we have a few pictures of Orpheus's Salvus Life jacket. The first basically demonstrating just how easy it was to put on and how foolproof it was, no matter how, you know, mixed up you got trying to put it on and how quickly you could put it on. And the next few pictures are coming up now are some Salvus Life jackets from various museums around the world that obviously, you know, they're quite rare now, these actual Salvus ones. And I think the last one coming up now is off a ship that was sunk at Dunkirk in the Second World War. Then we have a little news cutting about this new life jacket that Orpheus had invented or designed from a New Zealand paper.
Just a quick demonstration to show how very similar this old life jacket I have is still to the Salvus that Orpheus invented. I mean, all you do, it just goes over the head, the arms going through the two straps, it's on, and then you simply pull the two ties like you would have done on hers, and they are simply then tied in not too tight, a bow, a knot, or whatever you fancy really, but a bow would be quite sufficient. And there you go, you're ready to jump off the ship. How quick was that? Why this has this Macklin on the front of this one, I believe that was the name of the ship that this life jacket came off. Sadly, I can't find any reference on any of the online shipping records of the Macklin. So there again, if anyone knows anything about a boat called Macklin, please leave the details in the comments for me. But there you go. It was so easy, as you can see, fail-proof. Whether I put it on backwards, right way round, wrong way round, it didn't matter. I didn't know this story about a woman, you know, who'd created this life jacket after all these tragedies in her life. And, you know, I had never knew the name Orpheus Newman or a married name, Orpheus Beaumont. And it seems to me that she hasn't really been accredited with, you know, probably doing so much or saving so many lives in the marine world for so many people. Because, as I say, this type of life jacket, and this is very, very similar to hers, you know, carried on for so many years. I mean, there was slight developments in, you know, there in the Second World War and thereafter, certainly. But as I say, if this was still in service, and I know these type were still in service in 1960, I think it shows how long, you know, from the 1918 point right through, how long it's sort of served. And she's quite a remarkable woman by all accounts, and I believe she lived till she was 88. I think she died, my maths isn't on the top of my head, I think it was around about 1951, and she was about 88 when she died. But it's sadly one of those names that have slipped from us, and I think probably in New Zealand her you know, note is more prevalent obviously there, because that was where she developed this, where she lived and spent the rest of her life. But what a remarkable lady, you know. You can't imagine all the, you know, trouble that she went through in her life, and then put her will to this project and came out with such a good sound product. And that must have been really hard in that Edwardian era for a lady, you know, to do that. So what a person to admire. And I thought it was a really interesting story anyway, and I hope you've enjoyed this, me rambling on about it anyway. And as I say, whether we actually test this, well, wait and see. And that might be a little bit more light-hearted end to this video, but anyway, thanks for watching, and as I do hope you've enjoyed, please comment if you know any of this, you know, any more to add to this story. I would love to know more. I know there was I believe there was a documentary made about this in New Zealand a few years ago. I think her family remaining got involved in that because they thought she wasn't known widely enough for what the great work she did. So yeah, it's brilliant, and thanks for watching, and please do subscribe, please do come back. As I say, you'll never find the same thing here. I don't like, you know, doing the same thing week in, week out. I try and mix it all up a bit, and thanks for watching anyway, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.